Good morning. This hangout is on the air live with Sally, Ember, Edd. It is called Changes. And today's guest for episode 7, October 1st, 2014, is Nicholas C. Rossis. Say hi to everybody, Nicholas.
Hello, people. Thank you very much for joining us.
Nicholas is joining us all the way from Athens, Greece. Is that right?
That's correct.
So
it's
tell us a bit about why you're joining us and what you want us to know about you.
I suppose most people probably who are here today probably know me as an author. I've written Perseus, which is an epic fantasy series. I'm now writing book 4. I've written The Power of Six, which is a collection of short science fiction stories, mostly science fiction. And I'm about to publish my first children's book. I also have a company which is called Ed.D Media. That's been going on for almost 20 years now, and we do web development, marketing, internet marketing. And I also like to teach. So I've taught a number of courses during the years, especially on design, web design, and things like that. That's
awesome. All right, so I'm going to put up some URLs so people can know where to find you, and the best place you said for everybody to see you would be on your website, and
that would be the blog.
That's going to come up in a minute and everybody can see it and write it down or click on it. And then if they specifically want to know more about your children's book, which is called The Runaway Smile, then they can go to this website. When is that going to be available?
Hopefully within October, November at the latest. Certainly for Christmas / Hanukkah / whatever, for the holiday season.
Okay, so this is the website for that, which is on our events page. And then you also mentioned that you have your own business and you do web design and that you've written science fiction and fantasy and a combination of such. So I'm excited about that, of course, because I'm a science fiction writer myself. I'm also a playwright, a very bad poet, an even worse songwriter, and lots of other things. So I also love to teach. So that's something you and I have in common. And I've taught, you want to hear what I've taught? I've taught every level from preschool to graduate school. I've taught dozens of subjects, from literacy and numeracy to graduate topics to how to tie your shoes to how to read and how to swim and lots of other things like that. And I've taught writing, essay writing especially, in colleges. And my favorite things to teach are reading and swimming. Can you guess why?
No idea. Well, the reading part I can get. The swimming...
Well, I'll tell you why. The progress is obvious. Some things you teach, and it takes a long time to progress, and people don't see it. But with reading and swimming, every time people get better.
Oh, right. Or they drown, I suppose. Yeah, good enough.
So tell us a little bit about your Perseus series. First of all, how did you decide to make it a Greek mythology basis? And I'm going to ask you specific questions in a minute, but what do you want us to know about that series right now? It's got 3 books and 1 more coming out, and what's it about?
Okay. The concept itself came to me when I was reading Herodotus, who is this ancient Greek historian. He's considered by many to be the father of history, in the sense that he was the very first one to write history in the modern sense. So before that, it was all legends, but he decided that he needed a way to say that this part is mythology and legend, and this part is something that actually happened. So he was the very first one to do that, and he dealt with the invasion by the Persians of Greece, and how Athens was the one city that stood against them, effectively. You may know part of that through movies like 300, with Leonidas and Thermopylae and things like that. Herodotus was the first one to describe what happened back then. Now, of course, we nowadays consider him to be a bit of a hack, really, in the sense that a lot of the things that he said happened could not have happened. But even so, he laid the foundations for what became the science of history. Anyway, I was reading his book called Cyrus the Great and the Rise of Persia. And I grew up about 20 minutes from the scene of a lot of what happens in his book, which is downtown Athens, and of course there's Marathon Bay, which is where a big battle took place. And then it occurred to me, okay, what would happen if somebody took this whole scene and this whole story arc and somehow wrote a book about it in space, like something that happened in the future? And pretty much that's how Perseus was born. So the idea is to connect, well, to combine a lot of Greek mythology, Greek history, and science fiction and fantasy elements into a bigger story arc.
So you took some things that some people would consider not so harmonious, and somehow you found a way to put them together. And I think that's really interesting personally, because a lot of people think that if you write in what they call cross-genre, that you kind of shoot yourself in the foot, because if you have books in print, the bookstores don't know where to shelve your books. If you write across audiences, you have the same problem, because they want to pigeonhole a book literally so they can put it on a shelf, and they don't know where to put it, and they don't want to buy that many copies. Then they get confused or they get upset or whatever. So what do you think about that?
I think there is some truth in that. It can be hard to pigeonhole Perseus, and I struggled a lot with that. I remember at some point I was describing it as science fiction fantasy, and that just didn't work, because MMJ, a friend of mine, she came out and said, okay, it's science fiction and fantasy, and the cover is just fantasy, so what gives? It can be either one or the other. How are people going to know what you're talking about, what you're about with one glance? And then I changed the cover to make it fantasy completely, to make sure that, yes, it was fantasy, and I started describing it as epic fantasy, period. Having said that, it does have a lot of science fiction elements that I've chosen to downplay because of the genre conflict that you mentioned earlier. I think that nowadays, through indie publishing, that starts to be less of a problem, though. A lot of books that I read, and a lot of people that I've come to know, they appreciate the artistic freedom that comes with being an indie author. And I think that a lot of the problem, as you put it, is because the publishing companies, like you said, need a neat way to pigeonhole everything just because it works best for them. When you start writing, though, without having, well, money, if you like, on the mind, but just looking for the best way to express yourself and what you have in you, then it becomes completely different. And I think a lot of people appreciate that difference and enjoy it, be it as readers or as authors.
Right, and I think in your case, the Perseus books, obviously I haven't read all of them, but I've read parts, and it seems to me that you start with a science fiction premise, but all the rest of it is really very much wedded to the fantasy format. Would you agree with that analysis?
Absolutely. Ironically enough, in the fourth book, we go back to a lot of science fiction elements.
Okay.
That's just temporary. I mean, okay, you haven't read it yet, that's unpublished, but that's happening for about 50 pages, then we're back to fantasy. That's okay.
Well, I have a similar situation with my Spanner series, where I have a very big element of romance, a lot of elements of family literature or science in the science fiction, but it also has some paranormal, what a lot of people think should have vampires or shapeshifters, which I don't. But I have the PSI, the psi element, which I know you also have in your series. So I want you to talk about that, and I'm going to pin this comment that I have here that I put on the event page, because it's a quote from your website about the Perseus series and this group that you named the Iota group, which are kind of mysterious, and how you said they play with the minds, the senses, and the future of their entire planet, which is not Earth, by the way, for people who haven't read it. So what do you mean they play with their minds and senses and the future of the planet? How do they do that?
To understand that, I have to explain a bit about the book. The theory is that, well, the premise is that a group of people end up on a remote planet, which they call after the spacecraft. So that's Perseus with an A. Once they get there, they think that they're alone at first, but then they start meeting some natives. And then it gradually emerges that the natives are, in fact, remnants of humanity as well, and they had come to that planet 100,000 years earlier, and they terraformed the heck out of the planet. So the original inhabitants are now reduced to just a handful, and that's the enigmatic Iotas. So humanity really played a very bad game on them. If you like, they really shafted those poor people effectively. So the Iotas are now following a very Oriental, if you'd like, line of philosophy, and they try to accept everything that's happened to them. And some of them do, some of them do not, and they start fighting against humans. But because they're just a handful and humanity has taken over the planet, the only way to do that is by hiding behind the scenes and pretending that they're helping humans grab positions of power. So they play a bit of a devil's advocate kind of role. So there's a lot of...
well, no, it sounds like they're more like spies, like double agents.
You could say that. You could say that. They've got their own agenda, and that's one of the things that I wanted to promote on the book, that everybody has their own agenda. So even the people that you think are the good guys, they're really not just people with their own agendas. And the bad guys, again, they have their own agendas. And people you think are being friendly to you, they do it because they have their own agenda.
Well,
so
now you're coming to my favorite part of your blurb, where you show your misanthropic colors, which I happen to share with you. Here's where you describe your version of humanity. So you say this, that they are going to have the real cause of all their troubles, which is their inability to divorce or escape their own human frailty, their vanity, and their capacity to despise the others. So tell me how you decided to have that view of humans prevail in your stories. I mean, do we want to know your history, or are we going to want to have it censored? What are we talking about here, right? I'm a little worried, but I do want to know how you came to be a misanthrope, but PG, okay?
I'm not a misanthrope.
Well, your author self is a misanthrope. Let's put it that way. In this series, you have a very negative view of humans.
I like to think that I have a very fair view of humans. And in my experience of humans have their own agenda, as simple as that. So people will look after number one, if you like. And that's where religion usually comes in, or philosophy. And it says, okay, it's not just about making a living or having a good time while you're here, and that's all going to end at some point, and you should start thinking ahead. That's basically what religion is all about, isn't it? And morality, and, well, like I said, philosophy. To understand that people should obviously focus on their agenda and focus on making a living and having a good time here, but also do it in a way that doesn't have negative effects on others. And it seems to me that this is a lesson that a lot of humanity still needs to learn. I mean, if you just glance at the news, you'll be able to see what I mean.
Well, that is a good point, and I wonder if you're aware of this research that just got published in the last few weeks about the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that is a nexus of nerves and is where we conduct our emotions and decision-making about other people. And did you hear about this in terms of altruism and what a sociopath and an altruist have in terms of the sizes and functionality of their amygdalas is opposite? So someone who is very altruistic or unselfish has an enlarged and very much more capable amygdala in our brains. And those of us who are sociopaths or have no conscience, no morality, no empathy, our amygdalas are much more shrunken and less functional. Have you been hearing anything about that?
Actually, I haven't heard that. No, I do remember that the amygdala is also responsible for fears and the most basic of our instincts.
Yes.
So I find it fascinating.
Yeah, so they talk about the reptilian brain, right?
Of course.
And that's where they say that part of it is situated, is our most ancient part of our brain, the brain stem area is right there. But now they're saying, oh, no, it has to do with very high-level decision making and what you might call instincts, right? Because that's what they're claiming is in the reptilian brain, the amygdala, but that these are related to the size and functionality of your amygdala. So then, of course, my question and many people's question is going to be, how do you enhance, how do you improve the size and functionality of an amygdala? Or is that something that's set, or is that something that is caused to deteriorate through disease or trauma? How does it happen that sociopaths are created? And what can we do to change that, if anything?
And honestly, I don't have the answer, but it's something that I deal with in my book. I mean, I try to portray people as real people in the sense that there are no good and bad guys. Like I said, they're just guys who have their own agenda. And I make a point of making the bad guys do very good things and the good guys make very bad things. The whole idea being that we're all just trying to figure it out as we go. There's no little book that says this is what you're going to do and your life is going to be perfect. We just do what comes to us naturally and have to deal with the consequences. And if the consequences are poor, then we just realize that next time we have to do something different and hopefully something better.
Well, I like that you're really tackling some of these big questions in your middle grade and young adult fiction, because I think a lot of people are recognizing that young adults really want to have that challenge and they want to read those kinds of books and they want to have a chance to have the experience of thinking this kind of stuff through themselves and considering this. I remember having long conversations with my friends after reading Robert Heinlein or Ursula K. Le Guin or some of Philip K. Dick's books and really wanting to talk about the issues they raised and how they related to our thinking and our philosophies and our lives, and it was fascinating. So I think you're one of those people that must be very inspiring to young people. Do you get fan mail or email or anything from the kids that are reading your books?
Not that much, but I have been called to talk to schools a lot of times, so maybe there is something to that.
Well, yeah, and then when you're there, do they ask you questions about that, like to talk about these deeper issues?
When I'm there, it's mostly because they want to ask me what it's like being an author.
Oh, okay. So they're interested in the profession.
Yes, or what it's like to be a web developer or whatever it is that I do. And usually I can see a bit of a confusion over what people want to do. And I remember usually I start by saying, what is your dream about life? I mean, what would you like to be? And they go like, they say things like, I want to be a famous professional footballer or a soccer player in Greece, obviously, and things like that. And then I say, okay, that's great. Why? And usually it's because they say, I'm going to be happy that way. And then again, I say, okay, so you don't want to be a professional soccer player or whatever. You just want to be happy. Usually they're surprised by this and they go like, well, I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I suppose what I really want is be happy. And somebody else might say, I want to have money. Okay, why do you want to have money? Because that's going to make me feel secure or whatever. Okay, so you don't want the money. What you want is to be secure, to feel safe. And it all boils down always to things like that. We have, as humans, we have very basic needs that we need to cover. And that's a need to feel secure, the need to feel alive, the need to feel... It's a bunch of things, but it's never what we think it is. So usually we confuse means and ends.
Well, you bring up a really important philosophical point that I'm very connected to as a Buddhist, which comes from the Buddhist philosophy, the very root theory of how to understand other creatures of any type, not just humans, is to understand that every single sentient being has one goal, which is to be happy. And whatever that happiness entails, whether it's finding enough food for the day, or having sex, reproducing, finding shelter, finding a mate, having meaningful work, whatever that seems to be, playing, whatever's going to make us happy, that is all we are seeking in any given moment. But we often are confused, according to the Buddhists, by what would make us happy, and we often work against ourselves and end up being unhappy because we don't really understand Like you were trying to pick that apart with those kids and saying, well, you think you want to play soccer, but really what you want is to be happy, and couldn't other things also make you happy? Or what will happen when you retire from playing soccer? You can't play soccer your whole life. So what about when you're 45 or 50 or however old you have to be when you retire? What are you going to do then to be happy? You know? And those are important questions, I think, for everybody to be thinking about. But the second part of the philosophy in Buddhism is really critical, which is the development of empathy. Because once we understand that every creature just wants to be happy, we should understand that means that's what we all have in common. And then if we're going to have actual compassion, then we're going to try to help them be happy and alleviate their suffering. That's what they consider in Buddhism. We consider love to be the intention to help other people be happy, and compassion is the intention to help alleviate other people's suffering.
To a large extent, I couldn't agree more, actually. Absolutely. And I think to a large extent, all major religions and philosophies pretty much say the same thing. I mean, one of my favorite books is the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, and I've actually translated it into Greek because I like it so much. So I've read a lot about Taoism, for example, and of course my own religion, which is, I'm an Orthodox Christian, and even Muslims, for example. We all pretty much share the same outlook that be nice, be kind, be loving. That's the bottom line of all the major religions, at least as far as I can tell. And it's amazing to notice how far we've all been able to pervert that. Even Buddhism, which is, I think, has the cleanest slate, if you like, of all the major religions. I mean, if you think of the Crusades, that's a terrible thing. If you think what's happening now with the Muslims, that's another big misunderstanding. And isn't it in Burma? What's the name? The name of the country?
Over
Burma.
Myanmar, Burma?
Myanmar. That has all the trouble right now with Buddhists being awful to Muslims. So it seems that our capacity to misunderstand our religions is just endless.
Yeah.
And that's just another thing that I point out in my book, or at least I try to point out in my book.
That people are going to do what they do because they want something, and they're going to be selfish to the degree that their amygdalas are underdeveloped.
The size of a raisin, it seems, yes.
Well, so you bring up some of these bigger questions. I'm going to put up some other quotes from your descriptions of your science fiction short stories. You raise these really big philosophical questions. What is the nature of reality? Is there more to the world that we can see? And in a specific story, In the Hand of God, you go into something else we'll mention in a minute. But what is the nature of reality, of course, is the big ontological question, cosmological question. Quantum physics is asking that, all the way up to the most exalted philosophers of every country and religion. And here you are asking it in science fiction stories. And what do you answer it with, Nicholas? We are all waiting with breath that is bated. What is the nature of reality? Oh, Mr. Rossis, please tell us.
Actually, I assume you've read the book. I have like half a dozen different answers on each book, and I'm hardly the only one. I mean, Philip K. Dick is the very first one who did that, and I love his books just because of that. He always comes up with a different answer, and you get so many perspectives, and with each of them, you go like, yeah, that could work. Actually, I can see that working. Maybe that's what reality is all about. And then you read the next one, and you're like, okay, this must be it. I mean, sure, that makes a lot of sense. But I've been reading through his it's a very big book. I can't remember the name right now. Exegesis. His Exegesis, which means explanation in Greek. And that's a huge book. It's like 1,500 pages or something, and it's just his correspondence. With the number of publishers and friends and authors. It's amazing because there's so many good ideas in there, and it's just his attempt at figuring out reality. I love Dick. I mean, absolutely. Philip K. Dick is one of my favorite authors. Part of the reason is that he has this amazing capacity of embracing completely different concepts and bring them all together, which is something I strive to do as well.
Well, you know, part of what... Part of what you're saying, which is really important, is that we as writers have to have mentors and inspiring things that we read. And if Philip K. Dick is one of those people for you, and you honor him with your writing, that's just a great commemoration of his writing, right?
Absolutely. I'd like to see it that way anyway.
It's too bad he's not around to notice. Well, if you believe in reincarnation, he is around. Or if you believe in ghosts and specters, then he can notice it that way. Whatever your belief is in the afterlife, maybe he does know that you've honored him.
I'd like to think so, absolutely.
And do you believe the answer to is there more to the world than we can see? Do you believe the answer to that is yes or no? Other than because it's microscopic, I mean. But if with all of our tools, do you still believe there's more to the world than we can see?
Let me answer with a story. I was about 5 years old, and I had started my English lessons because, obviously, being in Greece, I started learning English from a very young age, 3 or something. So I had this Greek teacher at some point who was called Rena, which is Greek for Irene. Now, I remember one day, like I said, I was about 5, and I had left my books on my desk in my room, and I was half asleep. And suddenly I thought I saw Rena come down from the ceiling, and her legs were missing, actually. They were just like a jean. So she came down from the ceiling, and she grabbed her books, and up she went again. And I was mortified, obviously. I just started screaming, as a kid, and my parents rushed into the room, and they tried to figure out what had happened. I explained it. I was crying. I was howling. I was I was hysteric. It was very hard for them to understand what I was saying. And the very next morning, we found out that she had died. She had actually been in a car accident, and that was pretty much the time around about the time that I had seen her. So there is little doubt in my mind that yes, there is more to the world than we can see, just because I've lived it. So, yeah. To answer your question.
We can only go on our personal experience to validate certain kinds of understandings, because if we don't have personal experience, then we have to take it on faith. And some of us are not comfortable taking things on faith.
Couldn't agree more. And even that, I mean, you can...
Go ahead.
You can argue that that was just stress-related, that it was just a coincidence. I mean, you can find a number of alternative explanations for what happened. I've chosen to believe that that was her essence, if you like, her spirit somehow, but I'm very aware of the fact that there are a number of other equally plausible explanations. And to me, that's what makes me a bit of an agnostic as well. I mean, I have chosen to be a Christian, but I also have very big respect, huge respect for everything else, because I'm very aware that it could be, Buddha might have it right, and that's fine.
Well, if you're aware of the history of Christianity and Judaism, reincarnation was a huge part of their beliefs up until the middle of the Renaissance era, and then they just wrote it out. They just said, oh, never mind, we're not going to promote that belief anymore, and then it became something you weren't allowed to believe in and you weren't allowed to say was true. So that's just arbitrary, right?
Absolutely, and Origenes was the first one, was actually the biggest proponent of reincarnation in Christian theology. However, he was excommunicated for a number of other reasons, so obviously they couldn't go around saying that, yeah, he's excommunicated, but we agree with that part of his teaching, so that's okay. And that's a bit of a shame, because I have found a lot of mentions of reincarnation in the Bible. So if you ask me personally, then, okay, I put it this way. If God wants to save people, what's to stop him? I mean, he could reincarnate people if he likes, and he could just put them in heaven if he doesn't. It's up to him. It's not up to me to go around and say, no, there is no such thing as a reincarnation, or there is no such thing as heaven and hell. I don't know. It's just up to God, so that's fine.
Well, in Buddhism, of course, Buddhism has a long tradition of not only having that recognition, but having people who intentionally reincarnate and remember their other lives, and the Dalai Lama is the key figure in that. That's the reason he's called the 14th Dalai Lama, is that he has actually been the Dalai Lama 14 times. So it's not just that he's come back randomly. He comes back intentionally as this person And he has recently said, because of the Chinese invasion and occupation of Tibet and all the ways that they've perverted and twisted around Buddhism, first of all, the Chinese are hilarious in my mind, because one thing they say is there is no such thing as reincarnation. The next thing they do is they say reincarnation or intentional tulkus, is what they're called in Tibetan, are illegal. So if they don't believe in it, why would they make it illegal? Okay, then the third thing they did was they kidnapped the person called the Pension Lama, who's supposed to be the teacher of every Dalai Lama in every generation. So he reincarnates as a child when the Dalai Lama is an adult, so that by the time the Dalai Lama is passed to the next incarnation, the Pension Lama is an adult. So there's this great system where they can teach each other and learn from each other as they go through the generations. But they kidnapped the Pension Lama about 15 years ago, and nobody knows what happened to him, and then they named their own. They just found some kid and said, this is really the Pension Lama. So they didn't believe in all that. Why would they do that? Well, then the fourth thing they've just done, which the Dalai Lama has now spoken about for the first time, is they have said that the Dalai Lama is not allowed to designate his own tulku or reincarnate, that the Chinese are going to be the ones who say who the next Dalai Lama is. So the Dalai Lama just said recently, a few months ago, that he is not coming back. He is definitely not coming back as the Dalai Lama, not anywhere, not in Tibet, not in India, not in China, so that the Chinese cannot pervert it and cannot claim to have the real one, because he is now announcing, and he's going to keep announcing, I'm not coming back, which is a huge thing to do for the Dalai Lama, right? But it's also brilliant, because the Chinese can't claim there is one if this one's saying he's not coming back, right?
Absolutely. Again, it's what I said earlier. It's about having agendas, and people have their own agenda. It's political agenda. The Chinese actually have picked the fight with the Pope as well, and the Catholics do not want the Chinese to be allowed to dictate who's going to be bishop of the Catholic Church in China. They want that right for themselves, and it's a big fight, and I can't see honestly how it's going to end, because I can't imagine either the Catholics or the Chinese accepting the other's position. It's the same thing with Tibet. We all know that what's happening, but it's very hard to do something about it, if you like.
Well, I know, it's very disturbing, and I think what you're talking about is very important. And here's something that one of our viewers is saying. I'm going to put Sheila Strober's comment up, that she's saying something about you, Nicholas. She says that you remind her of David Amerland. Do you know who that is?
No, I have to look it up.
Well, she says some of it is the way you speak, your accent, but some of it is your love of literature, of spirituality, and your knowledge of many eclectic subjects that you have in common. Thanks, Sheila, for that comment. And I think that in the future, if you can look up David Amerland and find out more about him, maybe you can meet him or start a correspondence. Maybe you would be, author friends or philosophical friends. It's great to make these connections around the Google Plus community, don't you think?
Absolutely. And is that David Amerland has written Google Semantic Search and the Social Media Mind.
So you're already looking him up, see? So right in real time, you're finding out more about him. And now that Sheila has pinged him, is what we call it, because she put a plus in front of his name, and he'll get this message that he's been talked about, and maybe he'll even watch this video and get to know you, and he'll think that you're somebody he wants to communicate with. So that's great. Thank you, Sheila. I think one of the things we were just talking about, too, was back to your big questions. And this was the one I really wanted to have fun with in our conversation, and I'm glad we still have some time. In your story, The Hand of God, you asked the question, which isn't showing up in my comments, but the question is, what do the game characters do in a video game when we, the humans, stop playing? And that's the story that you wrote. So how did you answer that in your story without giving too much away? What kind of premises were you playing with?
Actually, the story came out of a game of StarCraft I was playing, and it was really hard, and I had to cheat during that last level. Anyways, there is a Disney movie, actually, about that, which I only found out later. When people started saying, oh, that story reminds me of that movie. Anyway, the answer is, I've been reading about these quantum physics theories that the whole world is just a hologram. So I was toying around with the concept of what happens when we create our own holograms, our own games, and effectively it's just a hologram inside a hologram, and the whole thing seems to just spiral out of control. I mean, you can, at no point can you be certain that what you're living is the actual reality, or just you're in somebody else's hologram. And it boils down to a whole, I think, well, it was Descartes, wasn't it, that first posed that question of how can we know that what we're witnessing is actual reality, and he came down with a cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I exist, because otherwise it's just impossible to know, just know. And of course, he then builds up from that, but that's again cheating, because he says, and if I think, then therefore I am, and if I am, therefore a God must have created me, which of course Richard Dawkins, for example, would, I think, take offense at. But anyway, the whole thing is just, we cannot depend on our senses to know what's happening. That's the one thing that we know for sure, because our senses are very easily tricked. So if we can't depend on that, what can we depend on? And the answer is, to me, the answer is nothing. We just don't know. Everything we do is a question of faith at the end of the day. And that's, again, the game of the whole thing with the hand of God. This person has faith in something, and it turns out to be something completely different, of course, as you would expect. But I thought it was hilarious the way that the story turns out.
Wow, that's really an interesting perspective, because what you're saying is, if we can't rely on our senses to recognize what is and isn't real, then what do the people do who don't have faith?
I think they have faith. Everybody has faith. It could be faith in science. It could be faith in your senses.
Oh, all right. Okay, I see. Faith in something.
We do have faith in something, absolutely. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, anybody who goes out of his way, like Richard Dawkins, for example, he goes so much out of his way to prove that there is no God. That implies a huge faith behind it, because otherwise, why bother? Okay, fine, there is no God. Okay. So what? Big deal, you know? Okay, go on with your life then. If there is no God, why waste your whole life writing books about it? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it's exactly true that somebody is that caught. I mean, that's what one of the parts of the philosophies and theories that I based my dissertation on is critical theory. Are you familiar with that?
A bit, yeah.
It arose out of Marxism originally, but it has that whole thesis, antithesis, and then coming into the new understanding. But the way they talk about it is there's hegemony, which is like the fish is in the water and all it knows is the water. And then there's resistance to that, which is no, I don't want to have that, and I don't want to be that, and I'm going to be something totally different. But then there's counter-hegemony, which is when you're still caught in it, and all you are is arguing against it. And that's what your guy, Richard Dawkins, is doing, is he's just as much caught in it as if he believed in it, but what he's doing is just railing against it. He's still caught in it. Whereas true resistance is you step out of the whole ocean and say, I'm not even a fish. There is no ocean, you know. Then you're really out of it, you know.
Exactly. There was this brilliant short story, I think it was by Ray Bradbury, and I think it was in The Painted Man, if I remember correctly. Ray Bradbury is another big influence of mine. I just love his works. And the way he writes, I mean, he's beautiful, beautiful writing. Anyway, there is this story where this guy is in a spaceship, and he starts realizing that since all he can remember, all his knowledge of Earth is in his mind, he decides that he cannot depend on it. I don't know if you've read that. It's brilliant. So if he cannot depend on it, he decides that Earth doesn't exist. Only what he sees and what he can feel at any given time exists. So he accepts the captain, for example, who is in front of him, for as long as the captain stands in front of him. The moment the captain disappears into his room, then this guy says, okay, there is no captain. I just hallucinate. I just imagine the whole thing. It's just in my mind. And at the end of the story, he just goes nuts completely, and he jumps into a spacesuit and jumps out of the space shuttle. And for the first time in his life, he's happy because there is nothing. He's in the emptiness, and he's just going there. And he's obviously going to die, but he doesn't care because he's got exactly what he wants, which is nothing.
So he's really a nihilist then.
I suppose in a sense he's a very much a nihilist, yeah. He wants absolutely nothing. But the point is he wants absolutely nothing because he's so disappointed, in a sense, uh, by the limitations of what he can perceive, of his perception and his senses.
And he can't rely
That's,
on them. He doesn't want to rely on them. Yeah.
that's the ultimate, I suppose, way of looking at it, stepping off the water, if you like. He really stepped out of the water.
Well, you bring up an important thing that we were talking about a minute ago that Sheila Strover is commenting on, that there's a series by Tad Williams. Are you familiar with Otherland? She's talking about where the heroine has to go back into the game and become an avatar because her brother got sucked into the game. So there was also that story in Jumanji where there was a board game. Robin Williams was in that movie version of that story where the kids get sucked into the board game and then somebody has to go in and rescue them, and they've got to get sucked into the game in order to rescue them. And so that can be like an infinite regressive experience where people keep getting sucked into your hologram or your game or whatever it is, and everybody has to keep going in to rescue them. Nobody ever gets out, right?
And don't forget Tron, which was more or less the same thing, the same premise. People get
Tron, right, that was true. And then she also made another reminder that not only does David Amerlin have his semantic search, but he has an open blog on Sundays that I guess he invites people to comment or write in or even talk on. I'm not sure, so you could check that out. Thanks, Sheila, for commenting and giving us that information. Oh, Sheila says she loves Jumanji. Well, I have a little story about Jumanji. Jumanji was filmed in the town I lived in at the time I lived in it. It's called Keene, New Hampshire. And they decided to film all those parts of Parrish, where the Parrish family lived, and they painted over all the storefronts and called it Parrish Shoes and Parrish Drugs, and they used the streets right around the main square, and then they did all these computer graphics to show the elephants stomping on the cars and all the different animals coming out of the game during the different, they had these stampedes going on during parts of the game of Jumanji. And a lot of my friends got to be extras in this movie because they need extras, right? And the person who directed it, if you remember, was the kid grew up to be the director, the one who was on Andy Griffith. His character's name was Opie, and then his real name is Richard? No. It's red hair, only now he's bald. His name is gone. But anyway, Robin Williams was in it, and then Kristen Dunst, as a little girl, teenage girl, was in it.
Oh,
this
she
other
was
young man, I can't remember his name. So they were all walking around Keene all the time during the making of this movie. So that was very exciting for a little town, Keene, New Hampshire, when we were living there.
It's your claim to fame, in a sense.
Yeah, well, I wasn't in it and I wasn't an extra, but I know people who were. That's my claim to fame. And that may happen. If you are lucky enough to have your books turned into movies, then you may get to go watch them be filmed and meet the actors and get starstruck.
I'll be sure to invite you over.
Have you done any thinking about if your books were made into movies, which actors you'd want to play which parts?
I've been asked that, actually.
You have?
In various interviews. So I've had to come up with a few names, but to be honest, I'd like to use first unknown actors, people first appearing on the screen for the first time. I'd love that, if possible.
That's a really good idea, because then they can create their characters and not have a carryover from previous characters, right?
Absolutely, exactly.
Well, Sheila's giving us one more URL so that anybody who wants to know more about David Amberlin's Sunday blog can find out on Pinterest. I'm just showing you part of it, but you have to go to our events page. The part you can't see, the SA after the Pinterest.com, is sanctuary+/David-Amerlands with an S _Sunday-read and then another /. And you can find that on our events page. Thank you, Sheila, for being our archivist researcher here. And we only have a little bit more time. It's hard to believe, but it is now 1/4 to the hour. The time just disappeared. So what I always do at this point with our wonderful guests, thank you for being so generous, Nicholas, with your time and being on the show. And I want to ask you to tell people what you have coming up and where you're going to appear or what's being published and what else you want them to know about how to get in touch with you.
Well, they can always get in touch with me through my blog, which is the best place to find me. I try to post something every day or every other day. So the one problem they might have is catching up with so much information. I'm writing the 4th book of the Perseus series at the moment. I'm writing the second part of 6, effectively, so that's another collection of short stories. And
so what do you mean? You have the power of 6, and then you're going to have the power of 6 2? Or the power of 12? Or what are you calling it?
I don't know yet, because I don't know how many stories are going to end up being there.
Okay.
But I've already written a number of short stories that I'd like to include there. And I'm about to publish my first children's book, which is The Runaway Smile, like you said earlier. So I'm keeping busy, all right?
URL to find out about that, niditales.com, niditales.com. You can find that. And you think that's coming out around the holiday time for whatever holidays people celebrate?
Absolutely. And it's probably going to be on the year live before that, but they can always find out about that from my blog. So I'd love to see people there.
Yeah, you know, I think people don't realize, and I'm just going to put a plug in now for some things that anybody in the future who might be watching this or who's watching it today live, I'd like to remind you and anybody else that is a reader and an enjoyer of blogs that we bloggers really, really appreciate your patronage. But we don't always know that you're patronizing our blog, and I mean that in a good way, being patrons, because you don't comment, or you don't put up a thumb, or you don't like it, or you don't share it, or reblog it. So you might really like what you read, but we have no way of knowing it if you don't engage. So I want to put a plug in for engagement from our blog followers and our blog readers. We love it when you follow us. We love it even more when you engage.
Here. I couldn't agree more. And you're very blessed because I have made a lot of new friends on the blog. A lot of people that have followed me and commented. They're just so wonderful people.
Well, that's how you and I got connected, was that we started following and commenting on each other's blogs and having a little repartee and banter, and then I started the show, and I said, oh, that's somebody I want on my show, and you agreed, so thank you. Thank you so much. And then my other plug I want to put in, because I know that you and I are both involved in writing and needing reviews and sometimes providing reviews, is we want our readers to understand how important it is for them to give us feedback on our books in a public forum, which is sometimes called a review. But I want to emphasize that you don't have to be a professional reviewer. You don't have to call yourself a reviewer. You just have to be somebody that read the book and wants to tell us what you think of it. And you can put your comments, your responses up on Amazon, which really helps us as writers, or Smashwords, or Kobo, or iBooks, or Nook, wherever you're allowed to put your comments. You can put them on our blog too, put them on Goodreads, which we really appreciate, but where they really count the most is on the sites where the books are sold. So if you would please, 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 as a reader, take a minute. It only takes a minute to put up a few comments when you've read a book, and it doesn't have to be that you loved it. It doesn't have to be a 5-star review or that you thought it was perfect. Tell us what you really think. Make a recommendation to Nicholas or me or other authors you're reading. Tell us what we should have done better. We want that from you. We need it from you. So please, 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 as a reader, as a purchaser, or a free downloader of our books, tell us what you think.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't have put it better myself. We live for that sort of thing. It's wonderful to write. It's because writing is just sharing whatever is inside you, and especially for indie authors, I think it's hugely important to know that people appreciate it in some way, because we don't have an authority, if you like, saying that yes, what you wrote is worth something, is worth reading. So when people actually come and say, I enjoyed what you said, there's nothing like it, honestly. It's the best gift you can give an author.
It is. So, it gives us something that makes us feel like we're not just talking out into the air and no one's listening, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about sharing. I mean, the part about Genesis I like the most is when it says that God created the world, and then he looked around him and he went like, if only I had somebody to share it with, because this is great. I did some really good work here, and this really looks nice. But I can't enjoy it unless, then obviously we have to share whatever we live through with somebody for it to make any sense.
That is so true. And so now I'm going to ask you to share your private and public philosophies on our final question that I ask every guest on my HOA Google Plus changes. And that question is answerable in any way you like, as large or small an answer as you'd like to give, and you get up to 8 minutes to answer it. So that's a long time, and please spend that time and say what you want. And the question is, given the personal, local, regional, global, national, political, social, environmental, and any other changes that you're aware of, what are your reactions? What are your hopes and fears? What do you like? What are you not liking? What would you like to say about changes today?
I'm glad you kept it very small, the question. I don't mean to sound weird, but I think, since you asked me what my feeling is about changes, the bottom line of my whole philosophy is very simple. We are all going to die. And I don't mean this in an apocalyptic way of running around, flailing your arms and going, oh, we're all going to die. I think once you realize that this is not forever and life is not eternal, you only have two options. You can either enjoy every moment of this life and accept every change that happens to you and go with it and see where it takes you and run with it, and instead of fighting it. Or you can just give up and, you know, shoot yourself in the head. I mean, those are really your options. Because if you think of life as something that's arbitrary and pointless, let's get it over with. But if you think that life is something precious that should be enjoyed because it could end at any minute, then the only thing you can do is just relax about it. I mean, it's only life after all, as the song says. And once you do that, it's so much better. Things are so much easier because you stop stressing about mistakes you made in the past. And it's like, okay, that's in the past. I can't do anything about it now. And you stop stressing about what's going to happen in the future because there is no future. I mean, for all we know, it could be all day tomorrow. So what's the point of stressing over something you have absolutely no control over? And the one thing that you do have control over, which is the present, is the one thing people don't enjoy because they're so stressed over everything else. And to me, that's the ultimate stupidity, if you like, the ultimate mistake. The only thing that you can make that's absolutely wrong is not enjoy the thing that you do have and lose it because of your fear concerning things that you don't have. So when it comes to writing, for example, I'm like, enjoy it. So you want to publish. You want to write. You want to write for your children and not publish, do that. You don't want to write. You have writer's block, that's fine, everything is fine, everything goes. Stop stressing about it and stop being afraid. The thing about changes is that people are scared, and we're used to something and we go like, I don't want to lose this, and that's fine, I can appreciate that, for sure. But at the same time, change is part of life. Change is going to happen whether you like it or not. So instead of stressing over it, just learn to appreciate the moment, the present. And that's, I think, the bottom line of my whole philosophy.
Well, I think you're secretly a Buddhist, Nicholas, because you just described the foundation of Buddhist philosophy, which is, they use the term in English, impermanence. But everything that came after that word is pretty much what you just said.
Well, I love Buddhism, I have to say, and I have studied Buddhism a bit, not half as much as you, obviously, but I do love Buddhism, and I do appreciate very much that it's a wonderful religion that has a lot to teach people. But then again, I feel the same way about Christianity too, so... Sorry,
well,
I haven't visited.
Yeah, and Christian mysticism especially has really been underexplored, except in Hollywood. And so I think it would be interesting for people who are considering themselves believers in Jesus, and I guess that is the definition of a Christian, yes, that they would look more into the philosophies of the original comments and speeches that are attributed to Jesus and say, oh, that's really what I'm interested in exploring. And then there's also a whole tradition of meditation and mysticism and what they call gnosis, right, which I'm sure you're very familiar with because that's a Greek word, of the early Christians. And I think that it's too bad that a lot of the modern Christians have moved away from that, because those are the foundations and those are the core of the beliefs that I think have the most to say about how to be a Christian. Even though I'm not a Christian, I was raised Jewish, but I've studied a lot about it. So I have respect for people who have their faith, as long as they don't use their faith to hurt other people. That's my philosophy.
Absolutely. That's just people, though. I mean, take Muslims, for example. Muhammad himself, the Prophet, has said very clearly that, has written actually, it's written in the Quran, that they should respect the religions of the book, like Judaism and Christianity, and that it's impossible, it's wrong to force somebody to change their religion, because then it's pointless. But because at some point somebody said, I thought I heard the Prophet say that if somebody is an apostate, then kill them. It's okay, for example, in Sudan, to kill people who decided don't want to be Muslims. So the amount of agenda pushing, shall we say, that goes on with religions is just amazing. They will do anything for to enforce their point of view on others. Even claim that that's what the religious leader would want, despite the fact that it's written, that the guy has actually written down that, no, that's not what I want, so please don't do it.
Right, right. Well, you can't really get people to do what we want them to do, and that's really the problem, isn't it? Because if you and I were in charge, everything would be better.
I'm not so sure of that. The only thing I know is that I wouldn't want to be in charge.
Well, we're getting a comment from another one of our watchers, our viewers, Rain Dowell, who's been a great help to me and one of my mentors in the HOA world. And
Rain,
she says this about us and is just complimenting us in our conversation. So thank you, Rain, for being here and telling us that you liked the level of our conversation and that you thought Nicholas and I were really giving something to people that might be interesting. So thank you for coming. And I want to thank everybody for coming. We're getting to that point in our HOA where we have to say our goodbyes, and I want to remind people that I am looking for guests. I'm taking next week off. October 8th, there is no Changes HOA. You can always find the schedule and the upcoming guests on sallyember.com/changes. And I would really like more people to contact me who want to be on this great show, because you make it great. You authors, you philosophers, you inventors, you writers of other kinds, people that are scientists. I'm interested in a lot of topics, as you've probably figured out if you've been watching these episodes. So if you want to recommend somebody, give them my contact information, which is sallyember@yahoo.com, or send them to my website. I have 3 requirements for guests. Number 1, keep it PG. Number 2, you've got to watch at least 1 episode first to make sure this is something you want to do, because it's not like a lot of other hangouts and it's not like a regular interview. And number 3, you have to have the right equipment to make this work, because otherwise it's really no fun for the viewers. So if you can do Skype, pretty much you have the right equipment. It's not that complicated. So given all of that, I want to thank you, Nicholas, for being here, and thank all my previous guests. And we really would love to have some great ones on the next episodes as well. And I am so happy that all of you that are watching today, or who may watch in the future, will also go to Nicholas's website and check out Perseus, his series, where he's coming out with a 4th book in December, his children's book, The Runaway Smile, and his Power of 6 somewhat science fiction stories about the great questions of life, and his blog and my Spanner series books, where I'm working on book 3. My book, This Changes Everything, book 1, is permanently free, so you can come in without spending a penny. So thanks again to everybody who loves science fiction. Thanks to everybody who loves fantasy. Thanks to everybody who loves paranormal and romance and cross-genre, young adult, middle grade, adult. thanks to all the readers. Thanks to all the viewers. Thank you, Sheila, for your final comment, because that is just so nice of you to say that. And thank you for anybody else who thinks that and hasn't said it. You want to say your final goodbye, Nicholas?
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure being here.
All right, we are going to end our broadcast on time with our final exhortation to all of you. Do well with your changes. Bye-bye.